Well, ladies and gentlemen, wouldn't you know it, the Canadians have caved. You can see Canada has effectively suspended most of its retaliatory tariffs on U.S. products. This stems from the trade situation, specifically with Canada. You could say across the board, but Canada, we do a ton of trade with. We signed the exclusive USMCA trade agreement with both Canada and Mexico back in 2020. We expect it to be renegotiated. The window is 2026. It might happen before then, but the point is that we have around 25% tariffs on Canadian products. Yes, there are exemptions, but it's just a 25% general tariff. Canada responded with their own retaliatory tariffs, but we know, and as you can see, what's happened here in terms of the inflation, food inflation at 3.8% in April. That's 2.1 percentage points higher than general inflation and nearly double the U.S. food inflation rate of 2%. That's Canadian inflation. Since tariffs were introduced on both sides of the border in March, U.S. food inflation has continued to decline while Canada's has nearly tripled. Yes. So Canada was always going to be more impacted by a trade war with the United States than we were. And it necessarily doesn't even have to do with a surplus or a deficit. It's based off of the reliance that their economy has and in their GDP it has on U.S. trade. It's like 18% or something is their total reliance is relative to the reliance that our GDP has on trade with Canada. We're a much more diverse economy. We're a much larger economy. So in terms of our trade with them, them meaning Canada, they are extremely more reliant on us. And when it comes to them posturing and saying we're going to fight Trump, a lot of that was circumstantial because of how close their election was. They sensed that there were a lot of Canadians that didn't like Trump and kind of equated Poilievre to Trump, which is why Poilievre had to kind of distance himself from Trump. But they had the whole elbows up thing. I think they broke their elbows with this. I mean, it was always a posture move for them. They've taken them off. We still have tariffs on them, and we're going to renegotiate a new trade deal. We know Carney met with Trump. That was about 2 weeks ago, first time meeting after Carney had won, and it's now been confirmed it's a liberal minority government. So it will be a liberal minority government leading there, and that's also brought us to the whole Alberta story, which has not yet crept into Trump's realm to where he's talking about it, but I do think at some point he will make a mention of Alberta and their independence fight. But when it comes to the tariff situation, Mexico has been a lot more cooperative with the United States. And you can tell by the way that Trump speaks of Mexico versus the way he speaks of Canada. Now, Mexico has bigger problems in terms of the U.S. trying to take out cartels and Mexico being basically run and controlled by the cartels to where they're not going to help U.S. and help our intelligence in trying to hunt out the major cartel leaders. But that's a different story. When it comes to the trade situation, Mexico has been very cooperative. Canada, on the other end, has been extremely combative, and they have come out with their own retaliation in terms of the tariffs, which have now, since, as you can see here, they have been suspended. So that is the big news. They've suspended their tariffs. We still have the 25% general tariff. There are certain exemptions because we have the North American trade agreement with them in Mexico. And there are also exemptions for Mexico, by the way, in terms of their trade with us. It's not just a 25% on everything. There are also different automotive tariffs. And there are tariffs on aluminum and steel as well, now that I remember, with Canada. So that's the overall tariff situation. We still have them. It's not like Trump brought them down and then Canada responded. Canada has just brought them down. The Liberals got what they wanted to a degree. They got the Liberal government, even if it is just a minority, which I'm sure they're very happy with considering how unlikable their last regime was that was also Liberal under Trudeau. So they got what they wanted, and this illustrates they were affected significantly more. They've got a much smaller economy, and there's an over-reliance on U.S. for trade based off of their geographical position, based off of their limited population. They have an extreme reliance on us, and they said, well, let's posture and let's go against America. And that's why you start seeing all these premiers like Doug Ford come out and say, we're going to shut off their electricity in Michigan. Total crap. Total posturing because there was an election and they wanted to be seen as the Liberals fighting the big, well, I guess Ford isn't, but just in general, they wanted to be seen as, oh, we're going to fight the big bad fascist Trump who's trying to take over Canada. and that'll never happen. And so it was all a move to appeal, especially with Carney, to liberals for an election. And the second well, not the second, but right after the election, within the next few weeks, all of the retaliatory tariffs that they were using to fight, because they were in a long haul fight against the United States. And also some of this is they wanted immediate pressure on Trump, but it's just it's not smart either way if you're Canada to do retaliatory tariffs on the US based off of their reliance on us versus our reliance on them. The only thing that you can hope is the current president of the United States is so unpopular, the pressure that we can put on in a limited time frame with the tariffs is going to force him to remove and do some type of deal. And originally there was a deal that was done. That's why, if you guys remember back, this was probably like it must have been February, because Trump immediately after he won and was sworn in, inaugurated on the 20th, he puts the tariffs on both Canada and Mexico, and then Canada agrees to something when it comes to fentanyl. I just saw something from Kash Patel to where he said the real problem with fentanyl is through the Canadian border, which seems crazy because, you know, it's been reported it's like 0.2% comes through the Canadian border versus the border with Mexico. So I don't know what that is, but it's interesting nonetheless. But originally, remember, like Trudeau agreed to appoint a fentanyl czar, and so they got the tariff suspended by a month, but then Trump puts them on, and it was 25%. That was before Liberation Day. That was a separate announcement. If you guys remember the tariff situation and the trade war, originally Trump was focused on Mexico, Canada, and China. Those were the big three he was really targeting. And then with Liberation Day, that brought everyone else into it. And now it's become this thing to where it's really just China at this point. But we also do trade a ton with Mexico and Canada, proximity, as well as the massive trade deal that we have with them that will be renegotiated. I think it's the correct verbiage is it's going to be reviewed, that they say it in 2026. I said there's going to be a new deal probably sometime this year in 2025, but it's not confirmed, but I just think that's what's going to be happening, considering there still is a general tariff on both Canada and Mexico. They are a little bit different. You have to treat Canada and Mexico differently because we have a trade agreement with them, and just geographically we're going to do a ton of trade with them anyways, rather than just all the other countries with the blanket 10% tariff. They're going to be treated differently. But in terms of the auto tariffs, there are some that are protected under the USMCA trade deal, but we do have the auto tariffs, the tariffs on steel and aluminum on Canada. And so that's just the update when it comes to this. The tariffs, the Canadian tariffs that they were doing, the reciprocal, they've suspended all of it. They've dropped the act. They want to have a good relationship with the United States. When we renegotiate a trade deal, we would imagine we're going to get an even better deal for the U.S. Than we got in 2020. And so I think there's a huge push by Trump and by the United States in general that's bipartisan, that wants to make more cars in America. And then this is just something else I wanted to talk about. It's the situation with Walmart. So I'm sure most people saw the Truth Social that Trump put out over the weekend on Walmart, saying and imploring them to not raise their prices in reaction to the tariffs. These tariffs that were imposed to China potentially are having an effect on Walmart, although to what degree? The thing with Walmart is they have extremely thin margins. That's how they're able to sell things for extremely low prices. I mean, it's wholesale, and they buy a bunch of stuff from China. So even a 30% tariff is going to have an effect to a degree on Walmart and their ridiculously low prices. So I'm guessing Trump probably got wind of that and said, listen, you better not raise prices. Remember the thing with Amazon to where they were going to say, oh, this is the price because of the tariff and stuff, and Trump got them to remove it. So Trump does this to where he'll threaten Walmart or Amazon and say, you better not do this. It worked with Amazon. And when it has to do with the tariffs and potentially prices going up. But with Walmart, right now it's a 30% rate. Again, the issue is Walmart, because of the amount of inventory that they have, the amount of things that they buy from China, even a 30% rate is going to hit them to a degree. And so they're talking about maybe we have to raise prices, and you say, well, you should eat it. That's the idea. And sometimes the corporations will eat the tariffs, by the way, to stay competitive, because this is capitalism in the United States. And so if somebody undercuts your prices, if you raise them, with Walmart, they can kind of get away with it just because of how popular they are. But we will have to see. You can see talking about Walmart. If Walmart decides they have to raise prices, do you think that's un-American? I think they're going to be very careful about how they do this. You know, they've received criticism from the president. They need to think hard. Yeah, and so this is what Trump will do, especially with these tariffs, and the situation is it's down to 30% on China. And I believe that's all the goods, because originally he had brought them down to 30%, and China has 10% tariff on our goods. But there was still the 145% massive tariff on items that were under $800, and then that got rescinded as well. So that's now also at 30%. But we'll have to see what happens in terms of Walmart and the tariff situation. But I just thought that was interesting when it comes to Trump originally calling up. I mean, he called up Bezos himself and said, you better not raise the prices or do this, what they were insinuating they were going to do, because Amazon was pissed off about the prices going up. And then the people say, well, that's because, you know, that's proof right there that tariffs caused a price increase. Well, tariffs are a complete reset. You have to understand. It's a lot bigger than a single price increase on something that Walmart imports or Amazon sells or whatever you want to call it. It's a lot bigger of a thing, because you have a number of goals with tariffs. Number one, it's to create more domestic production, which may or may not be happening. I think it will be happening with Trump. I mean, you could say he's already brought the tariffs down, but this is a delayed thing to where you have to negotiate deals. And I think there's going to be tariffs that probably go back up on China when the deals get negotiated. Remember what Bessent said. He said that this is the floor in terms of the Chinese tariffs, which is insinuating if we work out a deal, the tariffs will actually go up to a degree. They're not going to go up to 145%. But it was not a trade deal we did with China. It was a pause. It's not a trade deal we did with all of these other countries like Vietnam, South Korea. These are pauses to where it goes down to 10%. There's going to be a deal that gets negotiated. Look at the one deal we negotiated with the UK. There's still a 10% tariff on certain goods coming over. And that's why we're still going to make $7 billion per year in tariff revenue from the UK alone, because that's after the deal was done. So the point is, when you're talking about tariffs, and by the way, if you look at these tariffs and you look at what Trump has done, you know, I could very easily argue that tariffs have been very helpful for short-term inflation rates. Very easily argue that. And by the way, what Trump has done now, and you're starting to see the truflation tick up a little bit back around 2%. A lot of the energy's gone back up. Crude oil is at $63, $64. But what Trump did was, it wasn't even a crash, but he tanked the markets for a short period of time, and that tanked energy prices and it tanked inflation. That's why, if you look at, it's been 3 months. It's February, March, and April. We've gotten 3-month inflation core readings with Trump in. These are all Trump months. 2 out of 3 of them, it was under the expected number. It came in lower. Inflation came in lower. 2.4, 2.3%. That's core inflation. So 2 out of 3 months, it's becoming lower. Now, I'm not saying long-term tariffs cannot have an inflationary effect, as you're seeing and we're insinuating, and Trump is saying, well, Walmart potentially is going to raise their prices. But I mean, at this point, if it's a 30% tariff, the difference is with Walmart, they have such thin margins because they undercut everyone else. Their prices are very, very low already. So it becomes a problem. He's telling them to eat that, but there's not a lot there to eat. And I'm not trying to defend Walmart, but that's just how it is in terms of how cheap their crap is. But the point is with the tariffs, and this is why it's like the best of both worlds, we immediately get aggressively lower inflation without having to deal with the inflationary effects of the tariffs, because Trump has already brought the tariffs down on every country, basically every country since he's implemented them, outside of maybe Canada, and even Canada now there's exemptions. So that's the real thing. It's like he's indirectly helped the inflation situation. And look, with inflation, it's a lag. And that's why people are like, well, the April reading is going to be, or the May reading is going to be ridiculously high. Well, even if these tariffs cause significant inflation, which they won't, I can tell you, unless Trump decides to put 120% tariff on China for the next 2 years, the tariff level is not high enough to cause ridiculous amounts of inflation. But the only thing, like even if it did cause inflation, there's a lag effect. It would take months for it to show up in data, in the core inflation. So, and I don't think it will show up. That's the point, because he's delayed the tariffs on all of these countries. But even that, it's like, that might be necessary, you could argue, doing something like that as a global reset for more domestic production. The issue with doing that is you don't have the runway. That midterms come up too fast to do that. That is a multi-year reset. If you kept an inflation, if you kept a tariff rate of 130% on China for multiple years, you would be dealing with a recession 100%. And you say, well, that's bad. Well, long term, it may be better for the United States, but you can't do it because every 2 years is a huge elections, whether it's the midterms or the presidential. So you don't have a runway in terms of manipulating the economy at all. The elections come too quickly. So that's why Trump, even in with what he's doing with these tariffs, it all has to happen so fast. The tariff goes on, it comes off. It's because these other countries know, based off of how our electoral system works, somebody's going to have to pay the piper here. And they know that tariffs can cause negative things, especially if you do radical tariffs like on every country. And that was my original worry with Trump doing that Liberation Day stuff, was losing leverage, because you can renegotiate with these countries, but if you have tariffs on all of them, they're just going to come together and say they have no leverage if they're tariffing all of us. But now I think we've regained leverage because we've brought them down. We've brought the tariffs down on all these countries. And the best leverage in the world is the US consumer base. It's you want access to white people. All of these foreign countries, they want access to the white consumer market in the United States, in the EU, in the UK. It's very important. Like, look at China. And China's trying to wean off of it now. And they have if you look at the numbers, like the last 7 or 8 years, their reliance on the US consumer base has gone down, but it's still extreme. And I think that's why the US and China will be able to work out a trade deal, is because to a degree, they both want the same thing. The United States wants less reliance on Chinese manufacturing, Chinese production, and China wants less reliance on the US consumer market. To what degree, that's what's going to have to be ironed out. But they both relatively want the same thing. And so we'll see what happens with that. But either way, guys, make sure you follow me on X. Also, like the video down below. That's going to do it for this one.